Have you or a loved one experienced embarrassment or emotional damage from having tool steel in your collection? Steels such as A2, steels like D2, or steels such as CPM M4? Then by all means, contact the law offices of Apex Alchemy, where our experts are experienced in litigating the removal of embarrassing knives from your collection, oftentimes at little to no cost to you. Welcome back to Apex Alchemy. I can hear all the no knots in the comments right now saying that M4 doesn't belong in that category. Yeah, it's a tool steel. But, you know, if you watch Walter Sorrells, you'll probably know that you don't stand alone in thinking that M4 doesn't stand, belong in this category whatsoever, because M4, yeah, according to Walter Sorrells, doesn't make a good knife steel at all. It's the worst tool steel that you could possibly imagine making a knife out of, and it's a horrible idea for several different reasons. I happen to disagree with Mr. Walter Sorrells, but I happen to disagree with him because of my own personal experience. And if you have your own personal experiences with blades, you're free to disagree with whoever you want. I cannot count the times that I've told somebody about a knife that I get and it's in D2 and they say it's a nice looking knife. I just wish it wasn't in D2. All these knives right here in front of you today are D2. Now, Benchmade has moved up from D2 to Crewwear, if you want to call that a move up. And you should call it a move up, because it is better in some categories than D2, but it's like equal to D2 in others. But D2 is a phenomenal steel. And, in my personal experience, I've had really, really stupid good luck with D2. And we will go over all of that shortly. But first, let me get something out of the way, man. This is something that needs to be said. Me and Shane Gables have had conversations in the past about whether we think that the S90V that's being sold in Chinese knives is actually S90V, made by CPM, made by CPM, or if it's made by somebody else. If China's making their own steels, what's going on exactly? We don't really know, because that communication really doesn't ever get pushed out of here. And Shane did make a very valid point about how a lot of the S90V on Chinese knives doesn't say CPM in front of it. But then again, to be fair, we know that the Adamas was made by Benchmade, and it's in D2, but it doesn't say CPM either. But this is not ingot D2. This is CPM D2. It's the only D2 Benchmade has claimed to ever make or use. Sorry. So with that being said, Larry Thomas came out with a video not too long ago, a couple weeks ago. He was talking about what happens to MagnaCut. And then, at some point in the video, he lets us know that Niagara, which is a steel supplier, they do create steel too. They make steel, but they mostly supply steel, like CPM steels, to knife makers like Medford and shit like that. All right, so I've talked to these guys at Blade Show, and I would say like 80% of their business is supplying steel that's made by somebody else. And anyway, Niagara's got a order in from Carpenter, that's CTS Carpenter. They have an order in for MagnaCut. I might not be able to call it MagnaCut because the patent might not be out on it or whatever. I'm not really sure about the legal logistics of what can and cannot happen. But one thing was very clear. It's very clear that anybody can make that steel if they want to. Now, with D2 being such an old steel, the patent ran out a long time ago. So not all D2 is made by CPM. Most D2 is not made by CPM. Most of it is AISI, which is an American Standard type of tool steel company that makes tool steels, and that's what they do. And this steel's been out forever. It's been out for a really long time. I think it's turning 90 years old, if I'm not mistaken. I may be wrong about that. Put it in the comments if you know exactly what year it come out. But it's not primarily used as a blade steel. It's primarily used as press. Like, if it's being a tool steel, this tool steel is designed to press metal into a different shape. So it'll take, you make a die press for it, and you use that die press to shape other metal, So anyway, that's not really important, except for the fact that, D2 can it's pretty phenomenal. You know, it's a pretty phenomenal steel. And the problem with D2 is that it's got washed out by a lot of Chinese knives. And I'm going to throw a Boker out here, and I love Boker, and this knife actually belongs to Jed Hornbeak, and he mentioned that he saw me carrying this one and asked me if I wanted to borrow this one to just kind of compare it to. It's a Tonto, it's automatic, and it's it's tool steel. But anyway, I believe this knife is made in China. I don't know. I can't. It's a Boker Plus, so I'm pretty sure it's made in China. I think that's an indicator. But I haven't used this knife. I haven't sharpened this knife. I don't know exactly what's going on with it. If it's German made, the Germans do make D2 as well. So we know that there's such thing as Chinese D2, right? Most of us are aware that the Chinese make D2. Now D2, if you start looking at the composition, the original AISI ingot D2, let's get these knives out of the way, because that's exactly what Jed Hornbeak uses on his knives. And this is ingot D2. This is not CPM D2. I thought it was CPM D2. He corrected me. This knife and this knife. Now, Jed Hornbeak is a custom knife maker, and he doesn't fuck around. Okay? He worked with JB Stout. JB Stout doesn't fuck around either. JB Stout's one of those guys that's got like a legacy to the point where if he makes a knife, you're going to have to buy a lottery ticket just to get an opportunity to pay $3,000 for that knife. Not saying all of his knives cost $3,000, but some of them do, and all of his knives are in D2. Now, the thing was these guys had exposure to D2 in the machine shop that they worked at. They had this is a steel that they learned how to make tools out of, and they also learned how to make knives out of because their boss was really cool and allowed them to play around with that, right? Now, the AISI ingot D2 is it gets it really gets a sour reputation, not because of anything that's actually wrong with the steel, but because there's so much Chinese D2 on the market, and the Chinese don't actually make D2 the same way we do. I don't know exactly how they make it, but you can tell by the performance of this stuff that it's not the same stuff as this. Now, just assuming this is Chinese and it's not American made, and I will go ahead and guess that is the case. A lot of people think D2 is cheap. But let's go back into the composition. That's where we were starting. So forgive my ADD. I digress. The ingot D2 was 10% chromium. 14C28, I think, is 12% chromium. So it's almost a stainless steel, and nobody has a problem with the corrosion resistance of 14C28. But lots and lots of people have what they think is problems with corrosion resistance of D2. And I'm not going to say you never had a negative experience with D2, because I know people that are capable of rusting nickel plated frets on Stratocasters. I don't. Some people's oil in their hands can just turn anything into rust, man. I'm not entirely sure about all the science behind that matter either. But what I know is D2 is capable of rusting, but it also is capable of being a very good knife steel, very good knife steel. And one thing to take into consideration when we're talking about a good knife is geometry and the heat treat process. Now, Jed doesn't make the hardest knives in the world. I don't think I've ever tested this one, but I may be wrong. But it's got this rock pattern all over the place, so there's really not a good place to stick it on a flat. So I probably haven't. This knife, I have not tested either. I've tested some of his other D2 knives that I've had in my collection, and 57, 58, 59, somewhere around there. I've never seen one that's actually gotten over 60. I do know that he can get them over 60 because he's using cryo heat treat now, he's using a cryo quench in his heat treat procedure now. So I know he can get them over 60, and I'm sure those are great too. But these knives right here are probably softer. They're older knives. These are some of his older knives, and they may be a little softer, but it's because of the convex edges that he puts on here. One second. I happen to know this Work Tough gear is a softer heat treat. It's like 54, 55, somewhere in that neighborhood. And steel is SK85 or some shit like that. But it has a convex edge. And since it has a wider convex edge, I was going to show that to you. But these knives they don't lose their edge very easy. If you don't believe me, go ask Scab. I mean, you can seriously beat the ever-loving shit out of these knives, and they don't lose their edge very easy. Is it because SK85 is magical? No. It's because of the convex edge and the rest of the blade geometry. You know, you can chop forever and not dull the knife. Now, we mentioned Walter Scholes earlier, and we said that he said that you shouldn't be using M4 in a knife. He's got a video all about tool steels, and you should go check it out. It's a good video, and he says that A2 is better. 01, which I don't have an 01 knife completed yet, but I do have one in the making, but I've got some 01 steel back here. I'm not going to worry about it. 01, so this is A2. All right, let's go back to this knife. This knife is 6-hour. It's made by Hogue. It's an EXF01, and it costs $269. And A2 is possibly the cheapest tool steel that's ever been in existence. Now, the reason why Hogue sells these knives the way they do, and I'm not going to badmouth it, it's been a phenomenal knife. Me and Courtney have gotten out. Me and Courtney both love this knife. But you know, we're not those types of people. We're not really knife snobs, you know, so we can enjoy just about anything and take it for what it is. Now, I don't know if I would have ever given $269 for this knife, seeing how that it's an A2, but I can tell you this knife performs just fine. If I would have given $269 for it, not knowing what A2 was, and I would have used it, and then I would have found out how cheap A2 was after that, A2 just means that it's air hardening. If it's 01, it means it's oil hardening. You know, like, so it's air quenched, oil quenched. D2, I don't know what the D means, but it is also a air hardening steel. And then M4, I'm not sure what M means exactly, but I can tell you this. M4 is a high-speed tool steel. It's a high-speed steel in general. If you got drill bits that say HSS on them and you pay $13, $14 a piece for them, and their job is to drill holes in other metal, that's what it is. It's either M4 or it's M2. That's the job of this steel. If it has a letter and a number like D2, A2, O1, M4, you get it. You know, you see a pattern here. Well, that it's indicative that steel is going to be a tool steel of some sort. And tool steels are designed to shape, cut, or bend metal, you know, or drill holes through metal, which would go into the cutting. You know, like bandsaw blades are 15 and 20, so that's, you know, that is a tool steel as well. It's just it's a German tool steel, so they don't use the same letter number code. I don't want to stick around to this A2 knife for too long. I think it's a fine knife. I think it's a fine steel, but it's nothing to get excited about when it comes to the steel. The design's awesome. You know, it does a lot of stuff, man. I got this knife from Dave. I got a lot of knives from Dave. I couldn't tell you the stories on all of it, you know, honestly, but I know where it come from. But anyway, the knife is awesome. It being a Hogue, it's got excellent grip. You know, it's not really a 6-hour. 6-hour don't have shit to do with it. They paid Hogue to make this knife for them. You know, it's made in the USA. But A2, I mean, like, you could make like 8 of these knives for the same amount of money that it would cost to make one of these knives. Like, A2 is so cheap in comparison to D2, just regular old ingot D2. You know, D2 is often people often associate it with being cheap. It's not cheap. D2 is not cheap. It's readily available, and it is affordable in comparison to a lot of other inferior steels. But it is superior to just about anything that it's in its class with. You know, and what I mean by that is, okay, so CPM 154. This isn't CPM 154. Let's stand this in for CPM 154. This knife is actually AEBL. I don't know the price of AEBL. I do know it's cold rolled, which is one of the only cold rolled steels that you can buy. Like, say, if you're going to New Jersey Steel Baron and you want to buy a knife. This is a Diaz knife. It's an AEBL. All right, so I'm not really sure about the price of AEBL. I've never looked into the pricing of it. I mean, I may have looked into the pricing of it, but like, I can't remember. Let's act like this knife isn't AEBL. Let's act like it's CPM 154. CPM 154, like this is CPM D2. So it's a crucible powder metallurgy version of a 154. It's about the same price as CPM D2. And ingot D2 is not much cheaper than CPM D2. Just like 154 CM and CPM 154, not a lot of difference in price. There is a difference in price in the CPMs. The powder versions of these steels are more expensive, but we're not talking about like getting into the range of like a Magna Cut or Cruwear. You know, like it's still very comparable. And honestly, Magna Cut and Cruwear, the CPM D2 is not a whole lot cheaper than Cruwear. There's reasons for that because it's almost identical. You know, something else I want to talk about when it comes to D2. I don't have a CTS XHP knife around, but I've rarely ever heard anybody say anything negative about it. You know, you always get a lot of love in the community if you've got a CTS XHP knife in your arsenal, if you're showing it off. There will be a ton of comments below singing its praises, probably by a lot of the same people that don't like D2 or 440C. But as far as I understand, and I don't have this as proof type thing, so I probably shouldn't even say it, but like if you do a Google search, like just to compare CTS XHP to another steel, like what does it compare to? There's a little article that pops up about an experiment that Carpenter was doing to see what they would come up with if they mixed 440C with D2. And what they got was pretty stellar. So they called it XHP, and you all went wild. This video is getting long enough, so I'm going to wrap it up. But a convex edge, good blade geometry, and a good D2 that you're sourcing from a good reliable source is going to serve you well. And it doesn't matter what I say about it. It doesn't matter what everybody else says about it. All that XHP stuff led me to this point right here. If you are taking the word of somebody else without your own personal experience, you're being a fool. I mean, that's almost the exact definition of it. Now, you could also consider yourself to be a fool if somebody told you and you went and, like if somebody said, hey man, don't buy any M4, it is junk. You know, like if you was to listen to Walter Sorrells talk about M4 as a tool steel, and then you went out and bought a M4 knife, and then, you know, it turned out to be junk, then you would feel like a fool as well because you've already been told. But that is the price that it takes to get experience. And there is no other way around it unless you just have friends that's going to send you things so you can test out steel. And there's nothing wrong with that either. But listen, I think a lot of you are misinformed, which leads you to be uneducated on the matters. I think a lot of the rhetoric that goes around when it comes to tool steels is that it's junk, it's cheap, and they shouldn't cost no more than $30 or $40 because, you know, it's not a super steel. Yeah, and it's ridiculous to think that whatever China's producing is going to be as good as this. And I'm not talking about the knife itself. You may hate this knife, and that's okay. This is my style of knife. This is an Antler Hunter. I love this knife. It'll never go anywhere. But what I'm talking about is the quality of the steel that makes up the knife and the quality of the heat treat that makes up that's going to optimize the components that go into this steel. A lot of Chinese D2 has been scanned at 13-14% chromium. And there's nothing wrong with that, but that's not D2 anymore. That's pushing that 9CR range, BG10 range. And it's just a total different animal. You know, and they're really good for what they're designed to do. They're just not tool steels. They don't hold edges very well. And I'm not saying it has to be a tool steel to hold an edge well. But this, you know, the edge retention on D2 is just fine, and the sharpenability is perfect. Let's talk about sharpened. I've used this knife quite a bit. It's taken a pretty good beating, and luckily, you know, I've sent this one off to a few different knife tubers, and they've used it, and it's never touched a stone. And thank God, because it's got a convex edge on it, so it needs to be sharpened. Not saying you can't do a convex edge with a stone, but I've got a leather strop on a 2x72 grinder, and I can turn that speed all the way down to like 1, and I can strop this thing back in shape in about 10 seconds. And that's the way I prefer to have it, just like I can with the Work Tough gears, you know. And Jay does put convex edges on all of his knives, and everybody that owns them always says how wonderful they hold an edge. And the reason why that is not the craziest convex grind in the world, but they're not V grinds. Like there's a little bit of a convex grind to every knife that he's made. You can really see it on that tip of that Tonto there. But there's a little bit of a convex edge. So this is going to be a convex edge with a hollow grind, and it's chisel ground. Jeremy Horton, you know, is somebody that comes to mind whenever I see something like that. Jeremy Horton is another custom knife maker that whenever you hear people talking about his knives, they stay sharp. They stay unbelievably sharp, especially for budget steels. And listen, man, I'm going to wrap this thing up just by saying, like, don't be a sheep. You know, just because your favorite YouTuber said something negative about D2 doesn't mean you need to go around repeating it, look like a fucking idiot. You know, get your own experience. You can take their advice if you want to. We've all been there. We've all just ran with what somebody else has said in the past. That's fine. You know, like, I've got friends that I trust, you know, but I have relationships with those people, you know, like, and if, you know, I decided to take one of their words and I miss out, then that's what happened, right? You know, I missed out because I took their word. But like, you ain't got to be beta about it. You know, like you can make your own decisions based off of your own experiences, and that's what I would urge you to do. You can say whatever you want to about D2 in the comments, and I'm gonna go ahead and tell you, man, if it sounds like you picked that shit up from somebody that's got 600,000 subscribers and you brought it over here, I'm not going to respond to it. You guys have a good one. I'll catch you on the flip side.